We spend an incredible amount of time and, well, money and energy engineering our personal safe spaces.
Oh, absolutely.
Like you go home, you lock the front door, maybe you set a security alarm, you draw the blinds, you create this physical perimeter around yourself.
Right, a little fortress.
Yeah, exactly. And once that door clicks shut, there is this comforting illusion, that you are entirely in control of what gets in and what stays out.
It's totally an illusion, though.
It really is.
Yeah.
Because what happens when the intrusion just bypasses the physical locks and walls entirely? Like, what happens when the threat comes directly through the digital devices we voluntarily bring into our sanctuaries?
Well, that is the terrifying part.
Right. So today's mission is to unpack a deeply unsettling, heavily documented series of events originating from the raw audio logs of an investigative project. It's known as Midnight Signals.
Yeah, and this didn't start on some obscure internet forum or anything.
No, not at all. It began with a direct, unprompted phone call from a man named Daniel in Ohio, and his final recorded words, before his line went completely dead, were literally, "They're still calling."
We are looking at a narrative that operates at the chilling intersection of, profound self-imposed isolation, modern telecommunications technology, and the severe cognitive load of repressed history.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. We'll be analyzing how those elements fuse to create this targeted psychological pressure cooker. And for you listening right now, I highly recommend you consider the digital permissions you grant every single day.
Oh, for sure.
Because by the end of this deep dive, you are going to view your own phone settings in a very, very different light.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's establish the baseline of Daniel's environment first, because the mechanics of his isolation are, they're critical to understanding the vulnerability here.
Right. The isolation is the foundation.
Exactly. According to the logs, Daniel lived completely alone in a quiet, practically crime-free neighborhood. He engineered his life to just eliminate variables.
No roommates, no social visitors.
None. Zero background noise.
No.
His routine was basically an exercise in absolute controlled predictability.
Which is interesting because the human brain just isn't naturally wired for absolute silence. No, not at all. When you eliminate all external stimuli, you enter a state that's akin to sensory deprivation. The auditory cortex, lacking normal environmental data to process, essentially cranks up its internal gain.
Like turning up the volume on an empty channel.
Precisely. It starts searching aggressively for signals.
Which makes the inciting incident so much more damaging, I think. So, at exactly 2:00 a.m., Daniel gets a call on his cell phone from an unknown number.
And he's usually asleep at this point, right?
Yeah, so his phone lights up the dark room. At first, he just ignores it, but it rings again immediately, no voicemail. So he answers it.
And what happens?
There's no one speaking. He just hears this slow, steady breathing. He says hello 3 times. Gets no response, and just hangs up.
Wow.
And my immediate thought reading this, I was comparing Daniel's life to a hermetically sealed jar.
That's a good analogy.
Right. When you live in absolute controlled silence, your tolerance for any anomaly just drops to 0. Any outside noise inside that jar feels deafening. The urge to investigate that single crack in the glass becomes basically impossible to resist.
What's fascinating here is the specific mechanism of that psychological violation. When someone calls you at 2:00 a.m. and just breathes, it is neurologically vastly more terrifying than a shouted threat.
Wait, really? More terrifying than someone actually threatening you?
Absolutely. A verbal threat provides structured data. It gives your brain information about the person's identity, their motive, their emotional state. You can process that data and formulate a response.
Okay, so it provides an actionable threat model. You know what you're dealing with.
Exactly. But silence, or just the rhythmic sound of breathing, is an information void. It forces the brain's default mode network into overdrive.
Because it's trying to fill the gap.
Right. When you aren't processing external tasks or clear data, your brain defaults to internal narrative and self-reflection. In an extreme state of isolation, presenting the brain with an auditory void forces the victim to project their own highly personalized subconscious fears into that empty space to try and make sense of it.
Oh, wow. So Daniel is basically forced to actively manufacture his own terror.
Yes. And because that initial silent intrusion tested the perimeter and confirmed he would engage, the phenomenon didn't need to stay random. It established a vector.
A way in.
Right, allowing the attacks to escalate into a rigid, highly targeted schedule.
And it really escalates. The calls shift from happening, around 2:00 a.m. to exactly 2:13 a.m. Razor sharp precision every single night.
2:13 a.m.
Yeah. Daniel rationalizes it as spam or maybe local kids at first, but on the fourth night, he answers at 2:3 a.m., and the voice on the other end finally speaks.
And it asks a question.
Yes, one deeply charged question. Why did you leave me?
That is chilling.
But the detail that fundamentally shifts this from a prank to an actual psychological assault is the voice itself. It is Daniel's own voice.
Unbelievable.
He notes in the logs that it matches his specific rhythm, his tone, and it sounds exactly like him when he is emotionally exhausted. He pulls the phone away, looks at the screen, and the caller ID no longer says unknown.
Don't tell me.
It displays his own name and his own active cell phone number.
It is the complete collapse of external reality. The threat is no longer an other. It has assumed his identity.
But here's where it gets really interesting, because rather than immediately assuming paranormal activity, we have to look at the attack vectors of modern telecom. Like, caller ID spoofing is a well-documented vulnerability.
Oh, for sure. It relies on exploiting SS7 protocols.
Right, signaling system 7, which networks use to communicate routing information. An attacker with access to the SS7 network can intercept and manipulate the data packets to display any originating number they want.
So that explains the caller ID.
Exactly. Furthermore, AI voice cloning is increasingly accessible today. But to synthesize Daniel's voice capturing a very specific, tired emotional cadence, a generative AI model would require expensive phonetic data sets.
That implies a sustained, passive, acoustic surveillance of his home.
Yeah.
His devices had to be listening for weeks, maybe months, to capture the baseline conversational data required to synthesize that level of emotional exhaustion. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is the ultimate manifestation of the uncanny valley, but applied to auditory identity.
Oh, I like that. Normally, we think of the uncanny valley visually, right? Like a robot or an animation that looks almost human, but is just mathematically off enough to trigger that evolutionary revulsion response.
Exactly. Now, apply that neurological revulsion to your own vocal cords.
That's deeply unsettling.
It is. When we hear our own voice played back, it's already slightly jarring due to bone conduction altering how we hear ourselves naturally.
Yeah, nobody likes the sound of their own recorded voice.
Yeah, right. But hearing an exact digital replica of your voice, expressing a profound, synthesized emotion like abandonment, asking, "Why did you leave me?" that bypasses standard skepticism and triggers pure panic.
It's a complete violation.
It is a total digital invasion. The threat isn't just inside the house. It has hijacked the foundational markers of his selfhood and is broadcasting them back from the device in his own pocket.
And because Daniel was fundamentally broken by seeing his own name and hearing his own clone voice, he severs that digital connection. He completely stops answering the phone.
Which is the logical response.
Yeah, but refusing to engage digitally forced the anomaly to find a new localized attack vector. It shifted the terror from the cellular network down into the physical architecture of his home.
By leaving voicemails, right?
Yes, voicemails that directed him to a physical space.
The voicemails dictate a terrifyingly specific instruction. They say you shouldn't have left the basement.
Which introduces a massive architectural contradiction. Daniel states emphatically in his logs that his house does not have a basement.
He's lived there for years, he would know.
You would think. But the voicemail is so insistent that he pulls the municipal 1980s blueprints of his property.
And what do they show?
The blueprints confirm a basement exists, but note it was permanently sealed off decades ago.
Wow.
So he searches his home and finds a cleverly concealed, unlocked wood panel in a hallway. He pries it open, and the physical evidence he finds inside completely upends the context of the entire case.
What did he find?
He finds deep, uneven scratches gouged into the wood.
The physical residue of panic.
So what does this all mean? Because the crucial detail in the Midnight Signals log is the orientation of those scratches. They were on the inside of the hidden panel.
The inside.
Yes, that completely inverts the threat model. It means the danger wasn't trying to invade his sanctuary from the outside. It was born inside it and was desperately trying to claw its way out of the basement into the rest of the house.
This raises an important question about the cognitive mechanics of Daniel's entire lifestyle.
How so?
Well, in clinical psychology, repressing a profound trauma isn't a passive state of just forgetting. It is an active, continuous, metabolically expensive neurological effort.
So it requires an immense amount of daily cognitive load to keep those neural pathways suppressed.
Precisely. If we map that psychology onto his physical environment, the sealed basement ceases to be just a structural anomaly. It is the literal architectural anchor of his trauma.
Wow.
Descending into a dark, sealed basement is the ultimate manifestation of descending into the subconscious mind. Daniel's extreme, obsessive need to eliminate all external distractions and maintain absolute silence in his life wasn't just a quirky introvert preference.
It was a survival
It
mechanism.
was a strict requirement. He needed that perfectly controlled environment to conserve the mental energy required to keep that psychological basement door held shut.
He wasn't keeping the world out. He was maintaining an environment quiet enough so that whatever was locked underneath him wouldn't wake up. But the digital intrusion shattered that quiet. And this physical proof that his sanctuary had always been compromised from the inside is what finally breaks his paralysis. It forces him to physically walk down the creaking stairs into the repressed history of his own house.
Which brings us to the climax, where the physical nightmare and the digital nightmare violently converge. The audio logs of his descent paint a picture of severe environmental degradation.
Yeah, it's visceral. He describes the air at the bottom of the stairs as incredibly thick, like almost physically difficult to breathe.
Palpable tension.
Right. He reaches the floor, shines his light, and finds an old, physical, wired landline phone plugged directly into the wall.
Just sitting there.
A relic from the 1980s, sitting in the dark. And as he is standing there staring at this impossible object, the time hits exactly 2:13 a.m.
The schedule.
The hardwired phone rings loudly. He picks up the receiver, and a clearer, yet still slightly distorted voice says 3 words. Now you remember.
The loop closes. The repressed memory and the present reality fuse completely.
And Daniel's recording abruptly cuts to dead air right there.
Just ends.
Just ends. The Midnight Signals investigators note that the moment they received that final audio file, they attempted to contact him. But his primary cell phone number was immediately deactivated by the carrier.
He effectively vanished from the digital grid.
Completely. But the logs don't end with his disappearance.
No, the epilogue reveals the true nature of the anomaly. It wasn't an isolated haunting, it was an informational hazard.
Right, because during the post-production of the Midnight Signals investigation, the audio crew is working late in their studio. And at exactly 2:13 a.m., a cell phone resting near the primary microphone vibrates.
And let me guess the caller ID.
It displays Daniel's number, the exact number the telecom provider confirmed was permanently inactive.
Terrifying.
The investigators refuse to answer it. They let it ring out. But their studio equipment is still actively recording.
They capture something.
Buried in the heavy silence of the audio track, they capture a faint, localized whisper right there in the room. It just says, "You will?"
This shifts the entire paradigm of the phenomenon. Up until that point, the investigators, and really anyone reviewing their logs, are operating under the assumption that they are observing a contained historical event.
A closed case.
Right. Daniel was a subject in an isolated experiment that concluded. But the moment that inactive number bridges the gap and calls the studio, it breaches the observer's perimeter. It becomes an active, ongoing threat.
It operates perfectly as a digital contagion.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Consider the mechanics of an informational virus. It infects a host, monopolizes their resources, and when that host is consumed or isolated, the virus must propagate to a new node to survive.
It needs a new target.
Daniel's extreme isolation protected him initially because he was essentially an air-gapped system. But the moment he reached out and transmitted his audio files to the Midnight Signals crew to tell his story, he created a bridge.
He made a connection.
And the anomaly weaponized that very connection to spread. But analyzing the investigators' methodology reveals a fatal psychological flaw, I think. If you have thoroughly documented that a specific phenomenon utilizes cellular networks and operates on a rigid schedule, striking exactly at 2:13 a.m., leaving sensitive audio recording equipment running at that exact time, demonstrates the compulsion of the observer.
They wanted to see it happen.
Right. On some subconscious level, the drive to capture the anomaly overrides the instinct for self-preservation. They wanted to look into the abyss.
They manufactured the exact conditions necessary for the contagion to jump. It proves that safety isn't merely a physical perimeter. It requires complete informational quarantine. The moment you process the data, you are participating in the system.
To synthesize the core mechanics we've dissected today, we are looking at the terrifying vulnerability of modern infrastructure.
Absolutely.
The devices we rely on can be hijacked via SS7 protocols and generative AI to spoof our deepest identities.
And we see how the overwhelming cognitive load of suppressed personal history can physically manifest, turning a home into a monument to repressed trauma with scratches clawing to get out.
And crucially, we see the complete illusion of safety in isolation. You think you are fortifying your walls to keep the world out, but you are just locking yourself inside the blast radius.
It's a sobering thought.
Which requires you to evaluate your own environment. What are the dormant spaces in your architecture? The crawl spaces, the sealed attics.
And what about your digital architecture? The legacy accounts, the old phone numbers, the data you assume is securely disconnected.
Exactly. Because the assumption of disconnection is the ultimate vulnerability.
Let's look at the physical reality of the climax based purely on the structural facts. Daniel walked into a basement that had been physically sealed off by a solid wall in the 1980s. He found a hardwired landline phone plugged into a wall jack, and at 2:13 a.m., that hardwired phone rang.
Which requires an active circuit.
Exactly the point. Telecommunications infrastructure operates on rigid logistics. It requires active switchboards, copper wire maintenance, and billing cycle.
Billing cycles, yeah.
If a physical landline has been sealed behind a wall for 40 years, who or what institution has been paying the local telecom bill for 4 decades to ensure that specific circuit remained live?
Oh man, that shifts the entire paradigm. If there's an active billing cycle, this isn't some ethereal haunting, it's a structural operation.
It's physical.
The copper wires buried inside the walls of your sanctuary belong to an infrastructure you cannot see and cannot track. You were never actually in control of your perimeter to begin with.
You never really are.
Wow. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, stay highly critical of the systems you trust, and perhaps tonight, keep your phones on silent.